When Russia invaded Ukraine in the early part of 2022, many of the world's analysts and military enthusiasts predicted that the Russian superpower would win decisively and without a single setback. A little over a year after the Russian invasion, Kyiv is still standing and even seems to be winning the battle against its Russian occupiers. This raises the question of how a little nation that did not have any competitive advantages over the Russians might have managed to keep the mighty invaders at bay in a display of quality and power that startled the rest of the world in general. Welcome to Around the World, and today we'll be looking at the real reason why Russia failed to capture Kyiv when the Ukraine war started, and how this fact could influence the war moving forward. Russia suffered a historic loss in Kyiv in 2022, as the invaders had a bad start to the battle, and things only got worse from there. On February 24th, following months of preparation around Ukraine's borders, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared war and dispatched hundreds of helicopter-borne commandos, the cream of Russia's Spetsnaz, Special Forces warriors, to storm and conquer a poorly guarded airfield on Kyiv's doorstep. Other Russian forces also launched attacks across Ukraine, particularly in the contested Donbas region and along the Black Sea coast, and into the eastern city of Kharkiv. But the ultimate prize at stake was Kyiv itself, the seat of Ukraine's national authority. Because of this, elite airborne soldiers launched a massive offensive in the early hours of the war. Yet, with the impromptu war and Russia's superior machinery, Putin was able to immediately smash Ukraine's outgunned and outnumbered army as he had hoped. See, the Russians mishandled basic military functions like planning and executing the transportation of supplies, and were unprepared for Ukrainian opposition. They also had trouble combining air and land operations and underestimated Ukraine's ability to defend its skies. See, Russian Mi-8 attack helicopters flew south into Kyiv on the first morning of the conflict, en route to attack Hostomel airfield in the city's remote northwest. The Russians hoped to construct a base from which to fly in more troops and light armored vehicles within striking distance of the center of the nation's main city by seizing the airstrip, also known as Antonov Airport. However, there was a fatal flaw in the logic. See, some Russian helicopters were reportedly destroyed by missile fire on the way to Hostomel, and they sustained further heavy casualties from artillery fire after they arrived at the airstrip. It has been alleged that Ukrainian defenders shot down several Russian Il-76 heavy-lift transport planes carrying paratroopers during an attempt to seize control of a military airbase in Vasilkiv, to the south of Kyiv. Russian forces were eventually able to take control of Hostomel airfield, but the fierce resistance they met in the capital area forced them to change their invasion plan, which was based on the idea that Ukrainians would quickly surrender, the West would hesitate, and Russian forces would have an easy fight. Prior to the war, the U.S. Army showed way back in March 24th of 2003 that sending almost 30 Apache attack helicopters into Iraq from Kuwait to target an Iraqi Republican Guard division in an air assault mission behind enemy lines, like the one accomplished at Hostomel, is not only risky, but extremely difficult. See, one of the Apache helos was shot down, and the others were damaged by small arms and anti-aircraft fire. Thus, the mission was called off. Despite this initial setback, U.S. forces were able to recover and eventually take Baghdad. But the same could not be said for their Russian counterpart. The failure of the Russian 45th Guard Special Purpose Airborne Brigade's assault on Hostomel might not have been so noticeable in hindsight if the overall Russian effort had improved after that. However, that did not happen. Although their initial excursions into Kyiv center were limited and fruitless, the Russians eventually spent a lot of effort and resources attempting to encircle the city from the west. To delay the Russian advance, the Ukrainians fought back with everything they had, including Western armaments like Javelin portable anti-tank guns and shoulder-fired Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. The Russians later pulled out of Ostomel airfield in April as part of a larger retreat into Belarus and Russia. However, it wasn't over, as the Russians' defeat was widely publicized, with the stories of a Russian resupply truck that snaked along a major highway for kilometers towards the capital being widely covered as a footnote to the struggle for Kyiv. It looked bad at first, but the Ukrainians were able to assault the convoy's components and the vehicles, lacking adequate off-road capabilities, quickly dispersed or were rendered irrelevant to the battle. Not even Putin expected his troops to struggle so badly at the outset, and even the US and Western authorities had assumed that Russia's supposedly stronger troops would easily crush Ukraine's armed forces in the event of an invasion. Some analysts now question whether Putin really appreciates how much Ukraine's forces have gained from Western training that escalated following Putin's 2014 capture of Crimea and advance into the Donbas. In a weird twist, Russia's President Vladimir Putin announced on March 25th that his country had accomplished its goals in the Kyiv region and would now move its focus to the separatist Donbas area in eastern Ukraine, less than a month after the invasion began. Many, however, believe this is just a hoax, as a defeated army tries to save face from the world. And within days, the Kyiv retreat was obvious, dispelling speculation that it was a Putin ruse to gain time without abandoning his maximalist goals. Putin has since shifted the focus of the conflict to securing a land passage from the Donbas to the Crimean Peninsula and expanding Russian dominance in the Donbas. However, his attempt in Kyiv ultimately failed, exposing vulnerabilities that made it unlikely that Russia will make another attempt to seize the city anytime soon. It's now more obvious than it has ever been before that Russia has been unable to accomplish the majority of the goals it set for itself in Ukraine as a result of inadequate military planning, significant logistical challenges, low combat preparedness, and other deficiencies in its operations in Ukraine. These shortcomings include Russia's air, ground, cyberspace, and maritime activities being significantly hampered, and as a result of these and other issues, most notably Ukraine's military actions and the assistance from the West, the effectiveness of the Russian military has been reduced. As a result of heavy losses and little offensive progress, Russia withdrew its forces from Kyiv, and Ukrainian forces retook control of Russian-occupied areas in the oblast in April 2022. And as a direct result of the failures that Russia has experienced, the Russian military will be forced to conduct a comprehensive review of its training procedures, organizational structure, culture, logistics, recruitment and retention strategies, and planning efforts. This will be necessary because of the nature of the situation. Despite this, Russia continues to take steps that would amount to a de facto annexation of the portions of eastern and southern Ukraine that it controls. Because Putin and the Kremlin had such a fundamental misunderstanding of the circumstances, as well as their own capabilities, the assailants were unable to successfully carry out their mission. According to Barros, the way Russians designed their campaign and the key planning assumptions they made fundamentally undermined their chances of success on the battlefield. Thankfully, that marked the conclusion of the first stage of the struggle. Nevertheless, it should be noted that the war did not end there. For many people, the triumph was a harbinger of a probable victory for the Ukrainian side, while for others, it was simply a postponement of the inevitable victory that the Russian side would eventually achieve. But tell us, what are your thoughts? Is this success a foreshadowing of an even more significant triumph for the Ukrainians? Or will it provide the motivation the Russians need to win the war? Tell us in the comment area below. And if you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Bye, until next time.